Hey look everybody, it's the best Nintendo console.
And goddamn, I'm just tired of hearing how damn good it is.
Yeah, it seems like it kind of comes with the territory at this point when you are generally considered the best of something. People call you the best. And guess what? You're also gonna get questions as to if you're overrated. And I just kind of want to talk about this right now. You know, like, is the Nintendo Switch overrated? At least when it comes to like, you know, like its legacy being known as like, oh my god, this is the best Nintendo system. I mean, people were saying that as early as 2017. And I would say back then, yeah. Hell, I would say in like 2018, if people were saying, oh man, the Switch is the best Nintendo console of all time. I would definitely beg to differ that around that era. Because you gotta remember, in 2017, you know, when the Switch first launched, we were starting from like ground zero with this thing. Completely new infrastructure, no backwards compatibility, you boot it up and it's just a blank ass screen. No pack-in game, no built-in software. You didn't get AR games like with the 3DS, or you can mess around with the photo channel or anything. What, you can make a Mii in the Nintendo Switch Mii Maker, and the Mii Maker on the Nintendo Switch is borderline depressing. Just completely quiet, it's creepy to make Mii's in it, just flat out. And the game lineup for Nintendo Switch was good. It was serviceable in 2017. I think from a Nintendo first-party perspective, 2017 was fantastic. I mean, you got Breath of the Wild, you got Super Mario Odyssey, and then you got Splatoon 2, ARMS, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I mean, you look up top 10 Nintendo Switch games, a good chunk of the best games on this platform were right there within the first like 9 months of its existence. I don't think it can be understated how impressive that is. However, you know, Breath of the Wild was not an exclusive. That was also a Wii U game. Now, it might as well have been exclusive considering it's also a Wii U game. Nobody knows what the fuck that is. Then you also take a look at a lot of the other games that released in 2017 and 2018, and, you know, you start to kind of ask, like, okay, what is the identity of the Nintendo Switch? You know, its best-selling game is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And while eventually, by, like, 2022, we actually got, like, oh, new or old tracks as DLC, like, pretty much, you know, tracks made specifically for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But at the time in 2017, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was pretty much just like, okay, let's put Mario Kart 8 on the Switch, let's give it a few new bells and whistles, let's fix up the battle mode. But for the most part, it was like, yeah, it was pretty much just Mario Kart 8 again. In fact, I remember the online being worse in the Nintendo Switch version in 2017 than it was on the Wii U. And then you had 2018, which pretty much felt like nothing but Wii U ports at the time. You know, Bayonetta 2, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Mario Tennis Aces was pretty much just Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, but, you know, it was an actual game now. Hell, the big marquee title that year, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the core base of that game was Smash Bros. For Wii U. But of course, you can say that about a lot of sequels out there, and this is obviously just trying to be negative for the sake of making an argument. I just kind of want to ask myself, yeah, well, is the Nintendo Switch overrated? And at the time, I would say, like, when people were saying this is the best Nintendo console of all time, yeah, it was overrated. But over time, I think Nintendo has built up an incredible library with the Switch, and you can take a look at all the franchises that have appeared on here. Hell, even if you don't have a new entry of a game on the Nintendo Switch, for the most part, if you want to play a series, you can play it on the Nintendo Switch. And that's more than you can say about, like, the Nintendo 64, like there was no Metroid game or Fire Emblem game or whatever. But that also brings up kind of like one of the biggest points I feel against the Nintendo Switch and its legacy of being like the best game console of all time. It is the fact that, like, yeah, a good chunk of its library, a lot of like the best games or the most exciting games that came out for the system, they're ports, they're remakes, re-releases, remasters, like all of this. And when it comes to this being like, oh my god, it's the best, I can play all these old games on it, you know, okay, so then what's making the Nintendo Switch the best game console of all time? compared to any other like emulation handheld, a Steam Deck. You know, you could play literally anything you want on that through emulation. Of course, it may not be official, and I think that's a huge point in the Nintendo Switch's favor. That's kind of what we're arguing here. But that does make me question it because, you know, I look back at something like, let's say, the Game Boy Advance. I love the Game Boy Advance to bits. You know, this was like the first new game system I truly owned that was truly mine. And I look back at this thing with so much love, so much joy. But, you know, when I compare it to other Nintendo handhelds, I just kind of feel like its library is a bit lacking in retrospect. At the time, like, incredible. It is, like, the coolest thing ever because so many games were kind of like, hey, like, let's take Super Nintendo games and let's put them on the go. You know, that's amazing. And for somebody like me who, at the time, I didn't even know what the hell a Super Nintendo was, I was able to experience games like Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, all without really knowing I was playing ass-old games. Like, I was just a dumb kid. I was just playing a Mario game. That's all I was thinking. But you also had stuff like A Link to the Past, the Donkey Kong Country series. Mario Kart Super Circuit contained the entirety of Super Mario Kart within it. Hell, you had the classic NES series of games on the GBA, where you just had, like, flat out these old school classic NES games in their entirety on the GBA. That was awesome. Even if they were a little overpriced at the time, just the fact that these games, like, pretty much verbatim were on the Game Boy Advance, you could play them on the go, that was awesome. But to me, it also makes the Game Boy Advance kind of weird in retrospect because so many of my favorite memories with this handheld were games that weren't really the Game Boy Advance's own. You know, and I just think it's kind of weird that there was no mainline 2D Mario game on the Game Boy Advance. And when it came to Zelda games, the only Zelda game on the Game Boy Advance for the vast majority of its life was A Link to the Past. Sure, it had 4 swords included, but that's a multiplayer side thing. You had to wait until after the Nintendo DS launch to get Minish Cap. And of course, that doesn't really matter in retrospect, you know, Minish Cap is a great game, and it is the Game Boy Advance's traditional 2D Zelda, but it just kind of puts it in perspective. Like, at the time, it's just kind of weird. And by comparison, I feel like Nintendo's output on the DS was just far better across the board. You got New Super Mario Bros., 2 Zelda games. Even when it comes to Pokemon, like the GBA only had Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, and then you also had Fire Red and Leaf Green. On the DS, you had Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and Platinum, and then you had Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and then you had Pokemon Black and White, and then Pokemon Black and White 2, along with a bunch of spin-offs. And the same goes for the 3DS. I mean, you got Super Mario 3D Land as a traditional brand new 3D Mario game, and then New Super Mario Bros. 2, and then you also had Super Mario Maker for 3DS. Which is a shoddy port, sure, but it's still like, okay, like you got a lot of different Marios on this platform, mainline Mario games. Zelda, we got 2 remakes of 3D Zelda games with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D, A Link Between Worlds, a new 2D Zelda game, a sequel to A Link to the Past, then you got Triforce Heroes if you want some multiplayer fun garbage, and then Pokemon, we have a similar deal, X and Y for original stuff, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire for a remake, and then Sun and Moon for another original game, and then Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon for just whatever the f***. The point I'm trying to make here is when it comes to like a first-party Nintendo lineup, I just feel like, you know, looking back, DS and 3DS libraries are definitely a lot more interesting to me than the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance has a lot of re-releases as kind of like, oh, that's this franchise's big thing on this platform. I mean, no, even when it comes to third parties, I mean, let's take a look at this. You know, GBA, Contra, you had Contra Advance, which is just, you know, Contra 3 on the Super Nintendo, compared to the DS, which got, you know, Contra 4, a fully brand new game. Final Fantasy pretty much just had like re-releases of old Final Fantasy games and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance on the GBA, compared to the DS, which, yeah, they did have like remakes, but they were full-blown remakes. It was like DS 3D remakes of like Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 4, on top of all these other spin-offs. So when I look at the Nintendo Switch and I see that, like, oh yeah, you have Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze and Country Returns HD, but, you know, no original Donkey Kong game. You know, you may have Captain Toad Treasure Tracker from the Wii U. That's an incredible game, but, you know, it would have been cool if we got a brand new one. You know, there's no new Pokemon Mystery Dungeon on here. It's just a remake. What gives? But honestly, as I talk, you can kind of tell, like, I am kind of struggling because I feel like a lot of the games that we've complained about over the years, like, oh my god, the Nintendo Switch is just getting nothing but ports, all this stuff, they've generally followed them up with brand new games. So instead of just feeling like, oh, this is the replacement for those new games, they kind of just feel like, oh, this is great. Now I can play this game in addition to the brand new game on Nintendo Switch. Which by comparison, a lot of these ports of games on the Game Boy Advance just kind of felt like, oh, okay, like, yeah, this is your replacement for a new game on this handheld. Switch may have gotten Pikmin 3 Deluxe, and that was it for a bit, but then, we got Pikmin 4, in addition to the first two games. Yeah, when it comes to Zelda stuff on the Switch, we started off with pretty much nothing but, like, old games. We start off with Breath of the Wild, and then Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, and then a remake of Link's Awakening, which looked gorgeous and definitely had its own vibe. At least the Switch had kind of a visually distinct Zelda game to call its own, but it was still a remake. But in 2020, we got a follow-up to Hyrule Warriors and Breath of the Wild with Age of Calamity. Tears of the Kingdom was a Nintendo Switch exclusive, and that was the next big Zelda game. And then you got Echoes of Wisdom as a completely brand new original 2D Zelda game. And even when it comes to stuff like, let's say, Captain Toad, like, yeah, it would have been cool to just see a flat-out sequel, but at the same time, that game got DLC and brand new exclusive levels in that version. It's definitely kind of weird that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was just, the Nintendo Switch's Mario Kart. But, over time, I mean, like, you get the booster course pass, and it's pretty much like, yeah, this is basically a brand new game. Yeah, it's a bunch of old content kind of repurposed, but at the same time, it definitely helps to make Mario Kart 8 Deluxe stand apart from Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U. And even then, if you want to be funny about it, you could be like, well, the Nintendo Switch has Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. That's your Mario Kart. There's only a few series that I think Nintendo kind of neglected during the Nintendo Switch era, and for the most part, you can kind of understand why. Like, is it really that shocking how Star Fox barely really appeared? I mean, like, you got Starlink, which was kind of cute. And like with F-Zero, I really do like F-Zero. I think it would be great to see F-Zero fully come back. But I can also kind of understand that, like, if there's nobody at Nintendo that's desperately like, damn, we really want to make this brand new F-Zero game, like, it's probably not going to get done. And it's obvious Nintendo doesn't give a damn half the time if, like, a lot of these, like, smaller franchises will do that well. It's obvious to me that throughout the Nintendo Switch era, they have tried to bring back certain series that, like, have no real big sales potential. Like, are you really gonna claim that Nintendo doesn't give a shit about their smaller franchises just because, we haven't gotten a new Star Fox in a very long time, or F-Zero, when they brought back another code, or they made a new Famicom Detective Club? Like, that's absolutely nuts that they did that. And I think it just goes to show that, like, yeah, at the end of the day, Nintendo is going to fund games and really put most of their money behind games that they know are going to do well. The Mario, Zeldas, Pokemons, all of that stuff. But I think more than ever during the Nintendo Switch era, we have been proven time and time again that they are willing to give a lot of series another shot. So from a Nintendo first-party perspective, I feel like we've had one of the best lineups like any Nintendo console has ever had. Sure, near the start, we were definitely getting a little too port heavy, and definitely by the end of its life, they were definitely kind of relying on remakes, remasters, all of that stuff. But when you look at the big picture, I think the Nintendo Switch has definitely outputted, like, more than its fair share of brand new original titles, franchise revivals, hell, brand new franchises we hadn't seen up to this point, like ARMS, Ring Fit Adventure. So the port issue with Switch, yeah, I can kind of feel like it's getting a bit much sometimes, but it primarily felt that way, like, at the beginning of its life and at the end of its life. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Like, obviously, during the end of its life, they're transitioning over to the next thing. And with previous Nintendo consoles, as they were fizzling out, we pretty much got nothing. So yeah, sure, I'll take Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. I'll take Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. I'll take Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. These are all still high quality games, and with them being older titles, we learned that the Nintendo Switch's successor would become backwards compatible with the Switch. So, it kind of felt like we were building up a grand library of classic Nintendo titles that, we'll be able to play and continue playing for a very long time. So I feel like this port issue, while at times felt like it was getting a little too much, I think at the end of the day, Nintendo supplied a ton of original new content on this system, and a lot of it has been some of their best stuff ever. A lot of it's also been kind of dog shit, but hey, that's the case for most Nintendo consoles. Now, when it comes to the third-party side of things, that's when it gets a little weird. Because, you know, I feel like with third parties, you look at stuff like, you know, let's say the Wii, GameCube, or other Nintendo handhelds. The Nintendo Switch doesn't really have a ton of like very unique third-party offerings. You look at something like the Wii, like let's look at like all the Resident Evil games that released on the Wii. Like you got ports, you got 4 on the Wii, which is incredible, but you also get ports of the GameCube games like Resident Evil 1 Remake, Resident Evil 0, but then you get some unique titles, stuff like the Umbrella Chronicles, the Dark Side Chronicles. The Nintendo Switch, we just pretty much get like most of the mainline Resident Evil games. Which is cool, but I'm thinking about it in the future, like in 20 years, there's gonna be absolutely no reason to want to play Resident Evil 4 on the Nintendo Switch. There's absolutely gonna be no reason. I mean, like, they're just ports of the PS4 versions of the games. And even then, a handful of the games are cloud versions. You get Resident Evil 7 on the cloud, 2, 3, 8. You know, they're just cloud versions of the games on Switch. It's nice to have all of these mainline games available on the Nintendo Switch, but, you know, comparing the lineup of, you know, games from, you know, the Resident Evil franchise specifically on the Nintendo Switch, you know, the GameCube had a full-blown remake from the ground up of Resident Evil 1, and it is still held in such high regards as like one of the greatest video game remakes of all time. And not only that, but you also had Resident Evil 0, a classic Resident Evil that was exclusive to the GameCube, at least at the time. And yes, you had ports like Resident Evil 2 and 3, those were pretty much verbatim like the PS1 Dreamcast versions of those games. But then you had Code Veronica X, which was an enhanced port of the Dreamcast game. But I think the big one is Resident Evil 4. I mean, like, you know, just combining all of that, you get like, you know, a remake of the original Resident Evil, an exclusive classic Resident Evil, some enhanced ports, and pretty much the future of the series, which was exclusive to GameCube for about a year there. And then you have the Wii, which, you know, not as exciting, but, you know, you have 2 exclusive rail shooter games. That's pretty neat. You get an enhanced port of Resident Evil 4, and you get Resident Evil Remake and 0 just available on the Wii, which, you know, nothing crazy was added to them. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're pretty much just direct ports, but hey, I mean, they're there if you want them. But even that, I would say, is more interesting than what the Nintendo Switch got, which is the Resident Evil series. Yes, you can play Resident Evil Remake on Nintendo Switch. That's awesome. But like the GameCube originally got that game back in the day, and it was like completely brand new. It was like from the ground up a remake. And, you know, we weren't really getting that kind of stuff with such high-profile franchises on the Nintendo Switch. Or at least, like, as much as we did back then. And that's just the thing with most third-party franchises. I don't really think their lineups are very interesting on Nintendo Switch because, like, at the end of the day, they pretty much just give you just the flat-out ports that, you know, like all these other systems get, and you can just flat-out play the games on Nintendo hardware. Compared to like, you know, GameCube, Wii era, I think the more limited support those got makes them more like interesting and endearing to look back at. But it's like at the end of the day, we're talking about like, you know, like what makes a better system here? The GameCube got a remake of Metal Gear 1, which was cool, but it's also like a little like, you know, like, hey, some people love it, some people hate it. The Switch got the Metal Gear Master Collection, which is literally like pretty much all the Metal Gear games you would want up to like Metal Gear 3. You even get the MSX games, the NES games. You get the original PS1 game, which was like exclusive to the PS1 and PlayStation consoles for like ever. Enter the Nintendo Switch version of the Master Collection. Like, the frame rate isn't as high as I'd like it to be. The resolution isn't as high as I'd like it to be. The overall collection is like incredibly bloated. It's like this thing takes up so much system storage space. You have to download so many elements of it. It feels honestly pretty cobbled together in many ways. Like the loading screens on many of the games included in the Master Collection have like, oh, Metal Gear Solid HD Collection, that logo pop up, which is from the Xbox 360. They didn't even change that. However, it is better representation of the Metal Gear series than just Metal Gear Twin Snakes on GameCube. You know, most of the biggest third-party franchises are represented on Nintendo Switch in some way. You know, we got the Grand Theft Auto trilogy, and even though that initially launched in such a, like, an abysmal state, like, it wasn't great, you know, they patched it over time, and, you know, it turned into a pretty decent version. And on top of that, you got other Rockstar games like LA Noire and Red Dead Redemption. You got Dark Souls Remastered, Dying Light, Skyrim, Doom Eternal, Wolfenstein 2, Dragon Quest XI, Diablo 3, Overwatch 2, a handful of the classic Assassin's Creed games. So, like, at the end of the day, third-party support on Nintendo Switch has been a pretty powerful thing throughout the years. But like I said, looking back at it all, these ports just aren't as endearing as, you know, what we'd get with previous Nintendo systems. But honestly, like, that's kind of looking at things with rose-tinted glasses. Like, oh, the only Final Fantasy game on GameCube was an exclusive game, Crystal Chronicles. Oh, isn't that cool? But it's like, what are we talking about here? Yeah, that's neat to talk about, that's neat to look back on, but what would I rather have? One spin-off Final Fantasy game, or like pretty much all of the mainline games up to a certain point? And quite frankly, during this discussion, I mean, like, I don't really think I've been entirely fair with the Switch because, you know, it has had a lot of cool exclusive third-party games, even if those third-party games eventually made it elsewhere. I mean, look at a lot of the Square Enix stuff. Honestly, a lot of Square Enix's best stuff this generation has been, like, Nintendo Switch exclusive classic RPG type stuff. You know, Octopath Traveler 1, Triangle Strategy, Live Alive. And then Capcom, you have Monster Hunter Rise, which is the follow-up to Monster Hunter World, and that really kind of brought me back to how things went with the gaming industry, like, you know, a decade plus ago when, you know, I mean, like, you look at something like Dragon Quest, where Dragon Quest 8 is a PS2 game, and then Dragon Quest 9, it's a DS game. Like, the next entry in this series is on undeniably worse hardware. And Monster Hunter Rise kind of reminded me of that, but Capcom really made the most out of that, you know? Like, Monster Hunter Rise looks great for a Nintendo Switch game, and even on, like, other consoles, because it did eventually go to, like, Xbox and PlayStation and PC. Like, it still looks pretty good, and this is a Switch game at its base. Shin Megami Tensei 5 was initially a Switch exclusive. Like, that's a big deal. Oh, you have Super Monkey Ball, Banana Rumble, Samba de Amigo, Party Central. The Switch has, like, third-party exclusive games, on top of, like, third-party exclusive, like, indie games. My mind immediately goes to Golf Story. Like, that's still exclusive. Point is, the fact of the matter, the gaming industry pretty much requires multi-platform games at this point. Like, you know, it just doesn't make any business sense to just pour all this time and money into a game designed specifically for Nintendo Switch that's only on Nintendo Switch. When it's just like, who cares? If it's easy to, just put it also on PC at the very least. And I think ports in general just kind of fit with the Nintendo Switch's just whole vibe. You know, like, it was initially marketed as like, hey, this is a home console to go. So it's like the only way you can truly really push that is, you know, hey, you got to put the actual Skyrim on Nintendo Switch. It can't be, oh, the Elder Scrolls spin-off game, you know, like, oh, it's designed specifically for Nintendo Switch. That's cool, but it's like, you know, it doesn't really make this feel like a home console to go. I feel like that was kind of a problem that the PlayStation Vita and PSP faced. Like, Sony spent all this time really trying to tell people, like, hey, this handheld is a home console to go. Here's a bunch of spin-off games made by B-team developers. The Nintendo Switch's library, at the end of the day, I feel like it did exactly what it needed to do. Yes, there's gaps, like, hey, like, Madden never showed up. Call of Duty never showed up until Microsoft promised, like, legally they had to, like, commit to putting Call of Duty on Nintendo consoles at some point. You know, but I feel like there was a good variety of, like, pretty much everything. Nintendo first-party stuff, like, yeah, for a bit there were way too many ports. It was way too much of, like, a retread of what we just got with the Wii U. But those were also in addition to, like, brand new, like, cutting-edge entries in their biggest franchises. You know, we got Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey. Smash Bros. Ultimate was this huge deal, even if it was, like, very heavily based on Smash Wii U. Like, it is just, like, leagues above that game. Mario Wonder, Pikmin 4. We got 2 WarioWares, multiple Fire Emblems, multiple Metroids. On top of all of these classic games being available on Nintendo Switch Online, which at this point, I'm gonna say it, I feel like is way better than Virtual Console. The Virtual Console on the Wii, Wii U, 3DS, I have great memories, downloading all those classic games off of the shop, but just having like instant access to all of these classic systems and a huge variety of different games on each of them. Like, you get most of the first-party Nintendo stuff on top of a couple of cool, bigger third-party offerings. Like on NES Online, you got a couple of Capcom and Konami games. For the most part, though, like, Capcom is selling, like, the Mega Man Legacy Collection 1 and 2 on the eShop separately. So you're not going to get a ton of those games on Nintendo Switch Online, but they are available on Nintendo Switch. But what I love is that they're giving us some weird-ass games. Just some crusty little extras. Iggy's Wrecking Balls on N64. Winback? Like, what the f is a win-back? And the fact that they honestly went above and beyond like what was ever expected of them. Like they put out Kirby Tilt and Tumble on the Game Boy Switch Online service with full motion control. And they could have done that on 3DS. The 3DS has a gyroscope, but they chose not to because it would be too much work. Or the fact that they put like goddamn Quest for Camelot on Game Boy Color on Nintendo Switch Online. That's just some crappy licensed kids tie-in movie game for the Game Boy Color that Nintendo happened to publish, because Nintendo published like a lot of like licensed games for the Game Boy Color back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was one of them. And like they put that out on Nintendo Switch Online for some reason. They had to go out of their way to do that. Like, that's a Warner Brothers animated movie, so they had to definitely work with Warner Brothers. They went out of their way for like a game that nobody liked or nobody cared about. I love that. But I think the biggest one is GoldenEye. The fact that they really pushed to get GoldenEye back. And they're also working with Microsoft, who owns Rare. A lot of Rare's old games are now finally back on Nintendo consoles through NSO. Sure, the Wii was the first to do Virtual Console, and it was an incredible, magical experience getting all these classic games back for the very first time, and all digital, like you could just turn your Wii on and you instantly had like, a bunch of games you downloaded ready to go at a moment's notice. That was incredibly special. But, you look at how the Switch is doing things, and, like you have instant access to hundreds of games just with a subscription to the online service instead of having to download everything separately. There's pros and cons to each, but, I think NSO really did come into its own and became something really special. The quality of the emulation, man, is even like really good here. Way better than what we got on previous consoles. The fact we get save states, filters, different screen sizes. The fact that they offer the classic controllers now as like completely wireless, like made for Switch controllers. Yeah, many of them are completely overpriced, but damn, that's cool. And Nintendo Switch Online games, you can play them online. Okay. The games available on Nintendo Switch, like, when I'm talking about it all, sure, in like 20 years or something, a lot of this stuff isn't really gonna matter, like kids in 20 years are gonna look back at this and be like, who really cares? Because I'm sure by then we're gonna have the Nintendo Switch 4, and it's like, it'll do all of this and then some. You don't have to worry about crappy ports with like lower frame rates, lower resolutions. Decades from now, there's no reason to go back and play like a lot of these Nintendo Switch ports outside of curiosity. And even then, like, there's not going to be a ton there. It's just like, hey, do you want to play this game at a lower frame rate and resolution? Okay. At least going back and playing like a lot of crappy Wii ports, like, I don't know, there's just something different about them. It's a bit more of a journey doing that. The Switch, like, yeah, it's pretty much playing the same games. It just looks shitty. But the question here is the Nintendo Switch overrated? And I don't think it is. I think Nintendo really hit it out of the park with this console. Is it perfect? Hell no. There are so many problems I have with it. But overall, when I take a look at it, like when I take a look at everything Nintendo themselves did with this thing, first party wise, I feel like they did a great job. I feel like they could have done, a better job in many ways. I think I agree with some people that have said in the past that once Nintendo, got rid of the fact they were supporting two different consoles with, the 3DS and the Wii U, or the DS and the Wii, the fact that their handheld and home console are now all in one system, I feel like I was almost expecting like higher output from them. But hey, I mean, these games are in HD. You know, they're definitely going to take a little longer to put together than, you know, a smaller 3DS game. Games get more expensive to develop, all of this stuff. Like, I think their output makes sense, and, you know, it's leagues better than pretty much any other game publisher, especially, you know, PlayStation or Xbox. So it's like, I think they did a pretty good job. I think their legacy software available on Switch has been pretty damn good. Yes, it could have been better. Yes, they could do more. But just like I said, like, I think they did a good job with that. Third-party support, this is the best that Nintendo's ever had it. Like, pretty much every major publisher and developer has worked on Nintendo Switch and put out one of their biggest series on the console. Sure, many of them may not be new games or exclusive games, but, you know, like I said, at the end of the day, I feel like we're kind of trying to trade, like, what's more interesting with what's more valuable. I'd rather have all the Final Fantasies than, like, some weird-ass spin-off exclusive games. Like, that's more interesting, but, like, yeah, like, that's more valuable. I mean, like, even the game qualities are better than, like, the exclusive Final Fantasy games on, like, the Wii, you know? And here's the thing, man. With the concept Nintendo had with the Switch, they did it, especially with later revisions. Like, you know, the first one, battery life was a little iffy, but, you know, they had, like, that Switch Red Box variant that released in, like, August 2019 or so. Battery life was substantially improved with that. Then you have the Nintendo Switch Lite, like, so much more portable. Switch OLED is, like, amazing in portable mode because of the amazing OLED screen. And it's all, like, home console quality stuff. Or at the very least, like, it's melding handheld and home console gaming. And, you know, at the start, you know, they were really pushing how this is a home console to go. And I think once everybody started to understand what the Switch is, and, you know, I don't think Nintendo really had to prove themselves nearly as much years down the line, you know, it became a lot more suitable to have, like, all kinds of games, even from Nintendo. You know, a lot of Nintendo's handheld exclusive series for a while there came over to Nintendo Switch. Like, you know, you had Brain Age, Big Brain Academy, Mario and Luigi finally came to a home console, but it also didn't, because the Nintendo Switch is a hybrid, and, you know, I think it does both home console stuff and handheld stuff really well. The Switch had a clear direction. It had a clear objective, and I think it nailed it. Compared to, like, the Wii U didn't have a clear objection. What the hell was it meant to do? If anything, I think, like, looking back at Nintendo with the Wii U, they were trying to make it seem like this is an all-in-one system. It can do everything and be everything for everybody. And honestly, I think the Nintendo Switch does that, like, way better. So after becoming one of the best-selling systems of all time, one of the most popular consoles ever, and constantly being labeled as Nintendo's best systems, does it deserve that? Yeah, it's not really exciting to do that. It's a lot more exciting to say that about stuff like, you know, you grew up with, or stuff that's years old, stuff like the Super Nintendo or GameCube or what have you. But I look at what Nintendo was able to do with the Nintendo Switch, their output, third-party support, everything this thing set out to do and accomplished. Yeah, I think it is the best Nintendo system. Just don't get a big head about it, okay? But, you know, at the end of the day, what I actually really appreciate about this system the most is how popular it is. I think its popularity to some may be annoying. To me, I think it's honestly, like, really great, because so many people, like everybody I know has a Nintendo Switch. I'm able to bond with pretty much everybody over, like, stuff happening in this creepy little Nintendo world. And I didn't have that for the longest time, and honestly, that's how I got so good rambling my ass off about this kind of stuff. I don't even think I'm good at it. I can just do it. Because for a while there, I had absolutely nobody to talk about this stuff with. So I talked to the camera about it. Now, I can talk about it with literally everybody. But I'm so sick of talking to the camera about it, I still can't talk to them about my stupid Nintendo garbage. I vent to the camera like 2 hours a day at the least about this stuff. I don't need to talk to Mom about Pikmin 4.